Sandra, my mother said over the phone, her voice unusually firm. She wants to discuss the inheritance. Call her. The words hung in the air, catching me off guard. A few days had passed since my father's death, and I was still trying to process the loss. My husband, Aaron, had relayed the message with the same detachment he'd shown toward everything lately. What? Why would she want to talk about that now? I asked, the shock evident in my voice. Aaron shrugged as though it were the most mundane thing. I don't know, just call her tomorrow. His indifference stung, like a sharp reminder of how much he had changed. When had he become like this? My name is Sandra. I'm 48 years old and work as a company employee. For a time, I left the workforce to focus on raising our son, Robert, but I returned to work once he grew older. Aaron, my husband of 26 years, works at the same company. We married young, at 22, and Robert was born the following year. We've spent more than half our lives together. Once, we were so at ease with one another, but in recent years, I've noticed more cracks in his demeanor, little irritations that have grown into deep frustrations. One such crack emerged when Robert was just 3 years old. Out of nowhere, Aaron announced, I'm quitting my job. The words sent alarm bells ringing. Why? I asked, alarmed. I don't like my boss, he replied matter-of-factly. Besides, I deserve a better salary. Everyone else is moving on to better opportunities. Why shouldn't I? It wasn't the first time I'd seen Aaron be so easily swayed by others. This impulsive streak of his had never boded well, and this time was no different. The job change resulted in a small pay raise, but he struggled to connect with his new colleagues and found the work tedious. The lively man I once knew began to fade, replaced by someone dull and distant. Now, Aaron's only joy seemed to come from visiting his parents. Their house, a 30-minute drive away, became our regular weekend destination. At first, I went along, but the frequency wore me down, so I started staying home with Robert. Aaron's ties to his old classmates, many of whom still lived near his parents, seemed to fill the void left by his lack of workplace camaraderie. I once suggested, instead of always going to your parents' house, why don't we do something as a family? Robert would love that. But Aaron dismissed the idea with a bitter remark, Robert doesn't even like me. That marked the end of most family outings. Instead, Robert and I often went out with my parents, who took a more active role in his life. My father, a former company employee with a knack for investing in real estate during the bubble economy, had secured a comfortable passive income. Whenever we visited my parents, they would pick us up in their car, eager to spend time with their grandson. In contrast, Aaron's parents rarely invited Robert over, as though their affection extended only to their son, not their grandson. This pattern continued until Robert entered junior high school. By then, visits to Aaron's parents had become less frequent. When I shared this with my father, he seemed genuinely saddened. To lift our spirits, my father surprised us by purchasing a unit in a high-rise condominium near our home. When I asked him why, he smiled and said, "You can see fireworks from the balcony." He had remembered how much Robert loved watching fireworks during a past outing and thought this would bring him joy. My father's excitement was palpable, an effort to create a moment of happiness in the wake of so much change. By the time my parents moved into their high-rise condominium, Robert was already in high school. When I told him about my father's plan to watch fireworks from the new place, he was immediately excited. He visited his grandparents that very year for the festival, and it quickly became a cherished tradition. Every summer, on the day of the fireworks festival, they gathered together to enjoy the show from the balcony. My mother's health had always been frail, and not long after they moved in, she passed away. Though her passing wasn't unexpected, it was no less heartbreaking. Even after she was gone, Robert and I continued the tradition, visiting my father every year for the festival. The summer Robert turned 20 was especially memorable. That evening, he shared a drink with my father for the first time. My father's joy was unmistakable. His grandson had grown up, and the moment was one he deeply cherished. Aaron, my husband, had only visited the condominium once before. The next time he saw my father was at my mother's funeral. Aaron is still as impressionable as ever. When someone mentions spring cleaning, he'll suddenly launch into a whirlwind of tidying. If a coworker talks about visiting a new hotspot with their family, he'll propose taking Robert and me there, though such outings rarely materialize. I've come to accept Aaron's quirks. He's not a bad person at heart, and our lives have been comfortable enough. But recently, everything has shifted. My father collapsed unexpectedly at work. His colleagues acted quickly, calling an ambulance, but he passed away at the hospital from an acute myocardial infarction. The doctor said that had he collapsed at home, he might not have been found for days. Perhaps it was a small mercy that he was surrounded by people when it happened. Aaron and Robert came to the hospital, but they didn't make it in time to say goodbye. Somehow, we managed to get through the funeral, even as we grappled with the loss. Then, something unexpected happened. "Sandra, are you doing okay?" It was my mother-in-law. I hadn't had much interaction with Aaron's parents over the years, so her concern caught me off guard. Before I could respond, she continued, her tone shifting. "That high-rise condominium your father left, it's in a prime redevelopment area. If you sell it now, you could make a fortune." I froze, stunned by her words. She wasn't finished. It's fortunate that the estate is solely in your name, at least you won't have to worry about money for a while. Her practicality felt like a slap in the face. In that moment, I realized her visit wasn't driven by concern for me but by something else entirely. I had no idea about inheritance matters at the time, but others seemed deeply concerned about it, already approaching me with their interests. Suppressing my irritation, I calmly told my in-laws, "I'll think about it carefully," and asked them to leave. Later, my husband Aaron asked me, "Do you think that high-rise condominium can really sell for such a high price?" The redevelopment plans for the area had been discussed for a while, and my father had mentioned new commercial facilities and luxury condominiums being built nearby. Still, hearing Aaron ask about it now irked me. A few days after my father's funeral, Aaron brought it up again. "My mom said she wants to discuss the inheritance with you." "What? Why is your mother concerned about my father's inheritance?" I asked, bewildered. Aaron shrugged. "I don't know, just call her tomorrow." Frustration boiled within me, not just at my in-laws but now also at Aaron's indifference. The next day, I didn't reach out to my mother-in-law, but she called me instead. "You're planning to sell the high-rise condominium, right? Should I ask someone I know about a real estate agent?" she offered. Caught off guard, I replied, "I haven't said anything about selling it." "It's better to handle these things quickly," she pressed. "Let me know, and I'll help." When Aaron came home, I recounted the conversation. "What do you want to do? Are you planning to live there?" he asked casually. "It's far from the station," I said, mulling over the idea. Selling it might make sense, but I hadn't decided yet. Despite my hesitation, my mother-in-law continued to call, pushing me to act. Tired of her meddling, I finally told her, "I have friends in real estate who can help me. Please don't worry about this, it's my responsibility." "We're family, Sandra. Ask us for anything," she replied, her words feeling more intrusive than supportive. Her frequent calls became suffocating. Eventually, I consulted a trusted friend who was a real estate agent. I thought selling the condo might be the only way to quiet my mother-in-law. When I told her and Aaron of my decision, her call stopped, giving me temporary peace. 3 months later, the sale was finalized. The price far exceeded my expectations. That evening, Aaron returned from work and casually asked, "So, how much did it sell for?" Startled by his awareness of the sale, I masked my surprise and lied, "I don't know yet, it hasn't sold." He muttered, turning his attention to the TV. I couldn't tell if he believed me or cared at all. The next morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Opening the door, I found my in-laws standing there. "Aaron, your parents are here," I called out, confused. Once inside, my mother-in-law handed me a piece of paper. Glancing at it, I froze. It was divorce papers. "What?" I asked, utterly baffled. "Sandra," she began sharply, "how long are you planning to live off Aaron? My son has been under so much stress living with you." I turned to Aaron, desperate for an explanation. "Do you feel this way too?" I asked. He nodded. "If we divorce and split the money, it'll be easier for both of us," he said, as if it were the most logical solution. I was stunned. My husband, manipulated by his parents, seemed to believe this plan was reasonable. Did they think divorcing me would grant him access to my inheritance? They didn't seem to know that inherited assets weren't subject to division in a divorce. Taking the papers from Aaron, I calmly filled them out. "I'll handle it," I said, shoving them back at him. Aaron shrugged. "Fine, I'm leaving, you can stay here." He grabbed a suitcase, leaving with his parents. "I'll come back for the rest later," he added nonchalantly as he walked out. Left alone in the aftermath, I called my son, Robert, to explain everything. He was furious. "What, are you serious?" he exclaimed. Then, after a pause, he said, "Don't submit the papers yet, just wait." When I asked why, Robert didn't give me a clear answer but seemed to have something in mind. Trusting his instincts, I decided to hold off and wait for his call. A week later, Robert showed up at my house, his expression serious. "They were planning this all along," he said, laying several photos on the table. I looked down, and the pictures were of my parents' in-laws' house, but it wasn't the old, modest place I remembered. It had been completely rebuilt. "A friend of mine lives nearby and took these," Robert explained. "My parents-in-law have been bragging around the neighborhood about the new house they just built." I couldn't believe it. Robert's friend had been gathering intel like a detective. He slid another photo onto the table. This time, it was of my husband with a woman I didn't recognize. "My friend caught them together," Robert said, his voice laced with anger. I stared at the photo. Then Robert dropped another one onto the table. My husband and the woman were entering a hotel, their arms around each other. There was also a photo of them walking into my parents-in-law's house together. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Was my husband cheating on me? Had he been going to my parents-in-law's house just to see this woman? If they went into the house together, I thought, it means my parents-in-law must have approved of this relationship. Robert wasn't done. Dad's planning to marry her soon. That's why they rebuilt the house. I was reeling from the bombshells Robert was dropping. I couldn't believe how much his friend had uncovered. With this evidence, I knew I had a case. I can ask for compensation and get the divorce I need, I said, my voice cold and calculated. I wasn't going to give him a penny from the sale of my father's condominium. It was time to consult a lawyer. The following weekend, my husband called. His voice was unusually sharp. "Why haven't you submitted the divorce papers yet?" he demanded. "I've been busy," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Why the rush? Planning to marry someone else soon?" I teased, knowing it would rile him up. It worked. His voice grew even more irritable. "What are you talking about? If you don't submit the papers quickly, I'll get a lawyer to force you into the divorce." I had hit a nerve. "That's fine," I said calmly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." There was a pause on the other end. "A lawyer?" he asked, bewildered. "Yes," I replied, "and I'm going to ask for compensation." "Compensation? For what?" he stammered, his voice growing more defensive. "For cheating," I said, the words slipping out with a calm finality. "You've been sneaking around behind my back every time you went to your parents' house. How long has this been going on?" No, he stuttered, trying to backpedal. "That was just a high school classmate. It lasted maybe 2 years." I repeated his words, barely able to contain my disbelief. 2 years? A high school classmate? Thank you for the useful information." He tried to laugh it off, but it was strained. "Yeah, it's been 2 years, but we're getting married soon. If you don't submit the papers quickly, both our families will be upset. They've already agreed to everything." "So much talking," I said, "but are you sure you're okay?" His nervous laugh gave it away. "There's no way you'll ask for compensation. If we get divorced, we'll split our property. The money from the sale of your father's condo is substantial. After dividing everything, compensation won't be much," he said, his voice almost mocking. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Did you rebuild your parents' house with that money?" I asked pointedly. He hesitated. "Well, I took out a loan in my name, but if we divide the property, I can settle it all at once," he explained, as if this were a perfectly reasonable plan. "Are you serious? My father's condo was sold, but that money isn't subject to property division," I said, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. He faltered, then tried to cover up. "Well, why didn't you or your parents know that?" I pressed, frustrated. "You're already jumping the gun and rebuilding the house, thinking you'll get a cut. It's unbelievable." I smirked, watching his confusion. I glanced at my watch. It was almost time. "By the way, Aaron," I said, changing the subject, "are you home now?" "Yeah, why?" he asked, sounding suspicious. "I'll be there soon," I replied. I heard the intercom buzz in the background. "Answer it," I said, knowing exactly what was happening. "Robert?" Aaron's voice came through the phone, surprised. Robert had gone to see my husband, accompanied by a lawyer. I could hear his voice, firm and resolute. "I'm also going to claim damages for your infidelity." I didn't need to meet my husband face to face anymore. I had already made up my mind. Our marriage was over. I had no emotional attachment to him, but if he tried to take my father's inheritance, he would regret it. I heard Robert's voice again, steady and unwavering. "I have more memories with Grandpa, Grandma, and Mom than I do with you," he said, and tears filled my eyes at his words. Afterward, I claimed damages for my husband's infidelity, and we proceeded with the divorce. I later heard that the woman my husband had been seeing was suing him for marriage fraud, as she had been led to believe he was divorced and single. Robert's friend, who had been keeping an eye on things, told me that my in-laws had finished rebuilding their house but were already trying to sell it. As for my ex-husband, he hadn't quit his job, so he might have moved into company housing or back into his parents' house. It was an old building with a bad reputation for personal relationships, but at least he had a roof over his head. I hoped he'd learn to work hard. I sold my father's high-rise condominium and bought a new one in a much better location. Robert mentioned that he and his girlfriend would visit me this summer, as we could see fireworks from the new place. I imagined attending Robert's wedding one day, grateful for how much he had grown.